Nice. All right, we're just waiting for Kay to join. So for the agenda today that we had, I hope hopefully folks saw the email. Step one is uh, Kay was going to talk about the recently signed executive order from the White House, and then Dan Middleton is going to give a presentation on DCI, and then we thought we'd wrap up with continuing the conversation around our wish list slash backlog slash whatever it is we're calling it. And then just kind of continue on from there. But I need Kay here to kick us off. Let me see if she's online real quick. Okay, I'll see if she's on her way. If not, we could give her to 8:05, and if she's not able to join by then, we'll have Dan go ahead and get started, and then we'll swap in and when she gets here.
I can say that the executive order has kicked off a whole lot of things in a hurry.
Oh yes, yeah, it's definitely it doesn't like having a spotlight shined on your area of the world, right?
Right, but there's actually risks as well as opportunities here. How's this? Since we're waiting for Kay, just let me try to pitch to the TAC folks that we need to move a whole lot faster. We need to get like here are the projects we're working on right now, and if we don't, the train is going to leave the station and go somewhere else, and I think that would be sad. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but we gotta jump and grab the ring while it's while it's moving.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Actually, that's I've been thinking about that too. When I was reviewing last night the wish list document, one of the comments I put in there too is, can we look at some of this stuff through the lens of the executive order and start pulling things out that we can, you know, discreetly grab as chunks and have people actually start going to work on, so we can show some momentum of like, hey, we see this thing, we're going to go tackle it and drive towards it, and but we can have that discussion at the end. And I see Kay has joined us. Welcome, Kay.
Aha.
I have. I'm very sorry about that. I was. I've been a little swamped with things executive order lately. So
Oh, on top.
so anyway, yeah. And maybe is that what we want to kick off with?
Yeah, so David was just kind of briefly chatting about that, some of the opportunities that we have there. So yeah, if you want to take us into that, and we can have a brief discussion.
Sure. Let me share my screen. I had put together a document earlier that I think it's a good framework for this. And so this is what I did the night that the executive order came out, which is I sat down with it and took all of the. So the executive order is broad. It covers more than just software supply chain security. Section 4 in the executive order is specific to software supply chain security. And then, what I did is kind of took each of the subsections there. There are many subsections where there are timeframes for, so a lot of the executive order describes what needs to be done, or really what information needs to be provided, or what action needs to be taken within what time frame. So I took the subsections, I converted just for, in my own head, to a calendar date for the days of the requirement. And then I listed the initiatives in OpenSSF or related, often they're Linux Foundation initiatives that apply to those sections. So we're not going to have time to go through all of these today, and we have other important topics. So I won't describe all of the sections, but I think it will be interesting for us, and this might have been what you were discussing before I came on, to identify our working groups who have who are doing work or creating guidelines or best practices that fit within these different sections, and then have those working groups participate in providing feedback on behalf of this is something David Wheeler and Mike Dolan and I have been discussing offline. We think we might want to have there be a Linux Foundation response that crosses all Linux Foundation members, and then in the OpenSSF, we'll provide input to that broader Linux Foundation response. So, and this is we're still working through the details of this, so we'll provide more information, back to the TAC and to the working groups as we think about how we want to organize and coordinate. I guess the last thing I'll say, and then let me open for discussion. I think the primary of our working groups that will be involved are best practices. There are several places where they talk about best practices. So there'll be best practice. Actually, I think all of our working groups are involved at some point in here. I went through and identified some. I said maybe best practices for this first part about best practices. Security metrics might fit in here as well. There's one of our, this one I also said was best practices. I think the Intoto project will be interesting to provide feedback and be involved in these, as well as SPDX. There's one of these that deals specifically with identifying the most critical software, and then the requirements that are developed will apply to the most critical software first. And so that's an area where our Securing Critical Projects working group can be involved. And let's see, there's another one where we talk about what the levels for I'm forgetting the details of this, so I won't go into it anyway. So that's kind of how it looks. I can drop this document into the chat window. Folks can look at it. We can, use it as a reference, and we can, as we go forward, we can identify exactly which working groups are working on which things. So that's what I have right now on the White House executive order. I think it's super exciting for us as the OpenSSF to think about participating in this, driving it, and as the requirements are defined, creating new projects inside of the OpenSSF, or having our communities inside of the OpenSSF drive some of the requirements forward, so that we have a sort of a consistent, we're providing feedback, and we're taking the requirements that become defined, and we're moving the open source ecosystem forward on those requirements. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I was just curious. So you have Intoto SPDX. They're external projects. So we're going to position external projects, or
I think that those.
OpenSSF?
Right. I was just, as I was looking through these, I was just identifying, where in the broader Linux Foundation ecosystem.
Yeah, they're not external to the Linux Foundation.
No, but there are other projects under the Linux Foundation that do have a bit to do with security. So
yeah, please don't take anything I wrote as like set in stone. I was just, this was me on the night of the executive order saying, okay, of the initiatives that I know of, which ones do I think are, play in here. So.
Kay, in your defense, I wrote that blog post for the LF, trying to identify every LF project, and one thing I'm certain of is I missed some.
Yeah. All right, I'm in good company.
But I think it's good to call those out too, because as we make our plans around OpenSSF and the things we want to do, we'll want to know what other groups are out there that we want to coordinate with, right? And so detailing that out, I think, is definitely a useful exercise. And I think this is great, and it aligns kind of like what we were talking about right before you came on, Kay, was that when we get to the discussion around roadmap and wish list and all that stuff, pulling out the new ideas that we have as it might pertain to the executive order and areas of work that we should go focus on would dovetail nicely with this document that you've created. So I think that would be a worthwhile exercise.
I agree with that, Ryan. I feel like the executive order can be a great forcing function for us because there are a bunch of dates, and timelines, and we can organize ourselves around that, and that's good for us. It's focusing inside of OpenSSF, and it's also good for the community as a whole, especially when we talk about supply chain security. We need everyone moving in the same direction. It's really quite a challenge. And if we're supporting government requirements and we're using that to drive new work internally, it's really a win-win situation, I believe.
Yep, definitely agree. Now, I kind of wish we'd saved this and done it right before we were going to talk about the roadmap, but we'll kind of everybody push pause.
Okay, great.
Dan, if you're ready to give your presentation, I know we've all been anxiously waiting for this, and then we'll come back and kind of pick this back up and start talking about the rest of it.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right, take it away, Dan. It's all you.
All right. I can now share, so I will grab. It's nice that detached, so it's on top of my screen, but you probably can't see that. Move that out of the way. So can you guys see my slides? Am I on mute?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So Ryan and I were talking about diversity and inclusion, and talking about it from the perspective of open source governance. So what I wanted to talk about today, what we wanted to talk about today was less about like, here's a talk about why D&I is good, or here's some individual best practices, and more about from the perspective of us as a governance organization for open source, what are approaches that we should do within the practices that we have. And of course, the overall goal of this is that we build a vibrant and strong community, which is really the strength of any open source project. And the way that I like to think about diversity and inclusion is kind of the same with security. That a lot of the things that, like the good hygiene that you do to arrive at a secure project by like having good quality assurance, good review practices, all those things that don't directly go to security end up arriving at a more secure project. I think the same is true for diversity and inclusion, that everything that you do in order to have good hygiene in the community results in a more diverse and inclusive community. We hear, I think, D&I a lot within companies. I'm starting to hear diversity, equity, and inclusion more often too. So I've got civility on here because that's the term that I learned in open source, and that just purely stems from the kind of behaviors that are a little different in an online community versus what we might experience within our companies. So it's kind of necessary to highlight that human interaction portion of it that behaves a little differently sometimes in online communities. The idea of this, of course, is that if somebody, you can kind of jump in on this cycle at any point. So if somebody were to show up in one of our working group meetings, or to show up in a project to make a PR, or even show up in this meeting, if they feel like it's an inclusive environment, they're more likely to hang around. If they hang around, that in turn improves the diversity of our organization. And then just the way that humans behave, if you show up and you see that there's a lot of different kinds of people around you, you're actually sort of more inclined to behave in a professional way. So you're going to behave more civilly. And then so when the next person shows up and they see that, all right, everybody is being respectful of each other's ideas, then they hang around and we kind of go back around the circle again. So from an open source perspective, we want this good virtuous cycle so that we grow the community. But again, from a governance body perspective, what do we do about that? And I think in any open source problem, one of the best things to do is to go and see what we can steal from other open source projects, or fork from other open source projects, depending on which words you like. So this is an eye chart. This one isn't meant to be read through during the meeting. I've got a slide after this. Well, I'll make some generalizations. But the idea of some of the notes that I started to take on this slide were, let's go look at other successful open source organizations and see what they're doing for diversity and inclusion, and see if there's things or themes or best practices that we could bring into the OpenSSF. The ones that I will pull out from here that are a little bit different are, we've got these sister organizations at the Linux Foundation. So at the foundation level itself, the LF has some well-established best practices, like when you run a conference through the Linux Foundation, there's a lot of infrastructure that the LF brings to get that going, including how to get diverse speakers, good representation within the conference, a lot of good practices around that. And then there's also trainings that we might want to harvest and make use of. And more about that in a little bit. The Chaos project has come up recently in at least Chatter. I don't know if it's the Chatter, the mailing list, but that project overall looks at metrics for open source. And one of the first areas of metrics that they looked at was diversity and inclusion. So there's things to be learned from what they have researched and their ongoing practice of trying to figure out how to do some of those metrics. And that maybe is even more important to intersect with them, given this potential overlap with the risk assessments that they're doing now that kind of overlap with our metrics projects. And then at the beginning of this year, there was a project created called SDDI, which I internalized as a sort of a parent organization over other D&I efforts at the LF. It's a relatively new organization, and when I checked in with them, gosh, it's been maybe a month now, they were still sort of getting their legs underneath them. But I think going forward, that like the Chaos project might be one to intersect with, to learn from and exchange ideas with. Now, if we move along to a subset of some of those projects that I had listed, and we look across them, what are themes that we could apply in governance? Well, on the left side of the slide there's kinds of projects that are really governed by a corporation of sorts. There's some sort of business that can operate like the HR bodies that we have in the companies that we work for. So they can do direct action on hiring and other processes. And then as sort of a second degree of that, they've got the community policies. And then more horizontally, going through Hyperledger and Cloud Foundry out to Python, you've got different degrees of more community-oriented projects that don't necessarily have that direct governance of a corporation behind them. And the generalization that I'd make there for us to think about is that on the left side of that, you've got projects that have sort of outsourced the D&I effort into a working group. So you've got people whose day job, so to speak, is to think about, what do we do for diversity and inclusion in this organization and the rest of the open source organization? And out towards the right side of the spectrum, they've made a different decision, which is to say, like, well, there's some portion of D&I that fits into every part of the structure that we've built. And the trade-offs there are, on the positive side, of having a working group focused on it is you have people who are responsible for it. They feel like that's their charter. So there's always somebody working on it. On the downside of that is it can be sort of pigeonholed. So it's happening over in some other part of the organization, and that's not well integrated with the rest of what's going on. And then sort of the opposite of that is true for the other way around. So it's good if it's integrated everywhere, but if it's nobody's day job, then sometimes it's nobody's job at all. So, and feel free to interrupt me anywhere through this. If we look at what would that look like, what would any of those approaches look like for the OpenSSF? So here's sort of a sketch of what we look like. So we've got the TAC, we've got the governing board, we've got working groups and projects, and then member companies kind of off to the side there aren't a formal part of the governance directly, but they plug into the governing board, they plug into the TAC, they plug into the projects and working groups. Traditional roles that you would ascribe to each one of those structures are that the governing board, perhaps most importantly, would be the one responsible for having some sort of mandate. And this is a good best practice in even corporate organizations, that if you've got a top-down mandate for diversity and inclusion, that's a lot more likely to be successful than sort of a bottoms-up approach. And even though I think in our own experiences in our companies, we know that if we get some edict that comes down from on top, we're not necessarily going to do that. I think you can still imagine that when the leadership of an organization says something's important, that's more likely to be effective than otherwise. So for our role as the TAC, typically it's about chartering things, setting up certain evolutionary rules for the life cycle, something we've already done. The working groups might be one of the first places that people encounter what we do, and so for them to be welcoming and inclusive, that's sort of like the first entry point, the first point where something could go good or could go bad. And then the projects, typical role for the projects is just, hey, here's best practices, and we've got a list of those coming up, where they're sort of the boots on the ground, and they can be enacting the activities that help us to grow into a diverse and inclusive organization. And then again, kind of off to the side are the member companies. And so each of us probably comes from a company, whether it's formally a member company or not, and we're bringing resources. So we're bringing our own time as contributors, we're bringing our colleagues over. So headcount is probably the most valuable resource. So thinking about what is it that we do for our own companies for D&I, what does that bring into OpenSSF? What are the opportunities there? So since we are the TAC here, we probably want to zoom in on that TAC bubble. We want to be cognizant of what the other things do. So we influence the working groups and the projects, and there's some sort of interaction then with the governing board. But zooming in on our role in the TAC, it's mostly about what can we do with the working groups and the projects. And so when I was thinking about this, I think of governance as particularly from a TAC perspective, is we maybe have three kinds of tools. We can make requirements of the projects. Hey, you have to do this. This is a policy. We can make recommendations. So, pick one of these things. Here's something that we think is good for you to adopt. Or we can provide resources to them. Here's funding to do something. Here's a training course which you can get for free, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of the warning up ahead. I've been talking a lot. We're going to get some interaction going here. So think about what kinds of things that we would want to require, recommend, or kind of resources that we could provide. I think the spirit of most open source organizations and what we've been doing so far is that we want to be very light-handed on the requirements, and to the degree possible, do facilitation. So we want to enable the projects to be successful, the working groups to be successful. So what kind of resources can we bring to them? So as we're thinking about what kind of things that we can bring, maybe we want to think a little bit more lopsided on what resources we provide versus what kind of requirements that we want to enforce. Okay, so I set this presentation up for giving a couple weeks ago. And at that time, when I went and looked at the code of conduct situation, these were some of the observations that I had made. But this less about the COC and more about, here's just some examples to get us going. So we probably want to require a code of conduct. I'm not 100% sure if that is something that we require right now of the projects. It's in the template that we were kind of using and kind of not using. If we were going to require one, or if we were going to recommend one, this contributor covenant 2.0 is pretty common, I found, across the different open source projects that I surveyed. And then an example of a resource that we would offer to facilitate that is usually these code of conducts have some sort of reporting channel behind them. So the main goal of the COC is people show up and they see, oh, there's rules to behave here. I need to behave like a decent human. And then things generally go well. But when things don't go well, one of the enforcement mechanisms that you have in a code of conduct is that there's some sort of reporting or escalation channel. When I looked at what the projects had, and this was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I didn't see a way to actually get help if you needed help. So the enter email address here thing was not filled in for any of the projects or working groups.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
So we did do, and you might be aware of this, so at the OpenSSF level, we did adopt a code of conduct, which is based on the Contributor Covenant 2, version 2. And we do have, for OpenSSF overall, we have a mailing list for escalations. And that is listed in the code of conduct. I'm going to paste that into the chat window here. So, and the code of conduct is on the website.
Great. So that's already in the process of being fixed or enhanced.
Yeah. Yeah, so we did, and we, at the governing board level, we voted on the code of conduct and set these things in place. But fairly recently, we just, I think we just formalized it at the end of April. So we have that we can have the, if we want to do it that way, we can have recommend or require, however we want to do that the working groups adopt the community code of conduct and follow what's listed there for escalations.
Great.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
looking
so I
over
think
the
that's a
email
good thing
thread,
that
and
you're
I don't think we ever actually sent a public thing ratifying that. It was just a couple weeks ago. We should forward that along to the TAC list and working group leads lists.
That'd be great.
And then another follow-on action then for the working groups or the projects are to either include that directly in their repos or to provide a link if this is listed out on like our web page or wherever it's listed. But so again, the main reason I have this listed here is just here's some examples of how to think about requirements, recommendations, and resources. So I thought we could do a little bit of brainstorming here. What are some other things that we would want to be able to facilitate for the working groups and projects? Maybe if
Yeah,
you
so I
have them.
actually was going to ask real quick. So this conversation I thought was very interesting. Well, first off, thank you for putting this together. And then just kind of going through this, you obviously like were looking for this and didn't find it, and then Kay chimes in and says, "Oh, we have this already." And it's like, okay, great. So let's say we do have somebody that's participating in a working group and that there is a concern, like how do we get this information to them so that it's obvious? Like, are we going to go make them read the charters and all, or wherever to go find this? I think maybe step one here is to just define common ways that each repo, each working group, each whatever has this information in a common area that's easy for people to find. And so if there is a concern, they know that what the escalation steps are, who they need to email, what that alias is, that kind of thing might be, just the simple, quick and easy thing to do to kind of get things rolling.
Mm-hmm.
I will quickly note the CI best practices badge, which does predate this group, does have a code of conduct, and it describes how to raise up issues if they need to be raised. So there's at least one project that has one.
That's great.
We're on the right path.
Woohoo!
So what I've seen conventionally is that when you go to most repos, they've got a README, they've got a code of conduct, they might have like a contributing.md, but usually either within the contributing or separately there's a code of conduct listed, and then within that code of conduct file is the I need help path. So either more along those lines with the code of conduct, or if you think about other open source organizations that you participate in, what are some of the things that have been structured for you? It might be something, hey, we had to do this in another project, it was useful, or hey, we got access to this kind of resource, we don't have that in OpenSSF, and that would be useful.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense to maybe think about two places where we request this of the working groups or projects inside of OpenSSF. One is, I think it wouldn't hurt to have it be part of our README template so that it's right there front and center on the kind of the landing page for projects or for working groups and projects. And then, like you were just saying, Dan, require certain documents be in the repository.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a little hint on this slide about something else that could serve as an example of a resource. Just a little hint. So we'll just be more overt. It's hard to think of these things on the spot, and part of the point of this meeting is to start thinking outside of this particular meeting as we go out into back into what we're doing in the projects. Just sort of start thinking about in the other areas where you're working, what are other good things can you harvest from those experiences. So something else that we've got noted here is the Linux Foundation has an inclusive speaker course. They also have a inclusive open source. It's like intro to inclusive open source. I've got the exact title on one of the following slides. But those are just good trainings that I think everybody benefits from, to be aware of. Oh, hey, when a pull request comes in, there's actually been shown to be a bias for a look at somebody who has a male name instead of a female name. So there's a lot of good practices there that we can get from the training that's already out there. So at the CNCF, they require this of certain positions. Same for the CCC, the Confidential Compute Consortium. Anybody who's on the board or has sort of an officer position there, they require those trainings. I would think for our contributors that are part of our community, it might feel kind of heavy-handed to require that they take this free training. But we could think about, do we want to have the leaders of our working groups represent this behavior? Do we just want to make them aware of it? Like, hey, here's a link to some training. Do with it as you will.
At least at the governing board level, I would say, I think requiring some training is not a bad thing. And I would, I'm not on the TAC, so I'm not speaking for the TAC, but just as a member of the community, I like the idea of having there be some requirements around training for our leadership roles, and then recommendations for others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that either. I can definitely see the use of it, particularly for folks in a leadership role, like either the TAC or the governing board, right? So at least, because if we have these escalation paths, I would hope that we're escalating to people that know how to properly handle it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think what I've come across in general is most people want to help with diversity and inclusion. They're just kind of looking for ways. So the more that we can provide them with, hey, here's things that you can do, that's a lot better way to empower them to do what they already want to do, as opposed to saying, hey, you have to do this, and then it's sort of it takes that away from them. So I've got a bunch of other things listed that I'll circulate these slides so that you have them offline. I don't want to read through all of these, but when it comes to being somebody who's involved in a project or to some degree with a working group, there's a lot of just sort of, this is this good hygiene about running a project that I let off with it. So when somebody shows up for the first time, do they feel welcome? They submitted a PR. Does it sit there for a year without being tended to? Well, that person's definitely not coming back. Are we deciding things in sort of cloistered environments? So like Dan Lawrence had commented on the private TAC list versus the public TAC list. So there's just a list of things here. This is not a complete list, but it's probably more than enough to chew on over a day. And then also here's just a list of other resources. So thinking again about those 3 places where we could require things or recommend them or offer resources, here's just a list of stuff. So there's the 2 training classes listed at the top. Something that we didn't talk about yet is if we have guest speakers come in. The 2 examples that I have listed there happen to actually be guest speakers that focused on diversity topics. So we could definitely have those come into the TAC or into a working group as appropriate. But I think there's also been interest in the past about, hey, can we get a technical speaker on some new topic? So David had facilitated in the past a discussion about securing the supply chain, some of the technical approaches to that. So if we had other technical speakers come in, can we source people that are representative of the full diversity of the technical community? It's a way to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Other things to think about, a lot of our companies, so we've got great representation here from Microsoft and Google. You both have these inclusive writing guides. I think most projects have moved away from having like a master branch to a main branch, moved away from having blacklist, whitelist to allow and deny lists. So those are all good things to do. And there's already guidance out there in the community about different ways to adopt those. And I won't read through the rest of these, but again, more resources for you to chew about or to chew on, digest, running out of useful words. And then we can kind of wind up on this slide. So just as far as having some things concrete to come back to next time, we can think about, do we generally as a community here have an interest in continuing to pursue diversity, civility, and inclusion activities? If we do we want to occasionally spend time in a TAC meeting doing that? Maybe show up in some of the other governance bodies there on the right? Do we want to set up a separate set of enthusiasts in a working group to do that? So we could just have maybe a couple minutes of discussion now with people's first reactions to how we would like to move forward with D&I.
Yeah, so I'll say first off, again, thank you so much for doing this. I'm just kind of looking at the clock real quick, and so we've only got 15 minutes left, and we do have another big topic, but I don't want to cut this short. So I think maybe what the next step would be is, what do folks think of, like, could we create an issue on the repo that we can actually have a discussion on there that we could then use to then facilitate talking about this again in the next meeting? Because I think there's some great ideas here, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do things at the governing board level, at the TAC level, and at the working group level. And how do we want to do that? Just like what you were just saying, if we can kind of work on those things offline, and then we can come back and discuss them, and people can present their ideas. I think that might be a efficient way for us to help drive this forward, because I do think that this is very, very important to do. So
Yeah, just quickly, I'll agree. And at the governing board level, we had also talked about maybe having a committee that was focused on these same things. So, maybe, and I'm not sure that it matters whether it's the committees at the TAC level or the GB level or a joint committee with all those, but I think it's interesting, and I personally would be happy to be involved. So.
yeah, agreed. I think that there are different slices of this across, depending on the governing board or TAC. I don't think it's one or the other. There's different perspectives, but yeah, coordinating across everything I think will be key to making this successful. But before we wrap up, and again, Dan, I apologize that we're running tight on time. Are there any last minute questions for Dan before we switch topics to the next thing, and then?
Okay.
Cool.
Well, thanks for everybody's attention on that. And I think we did fit into the 30 minutes that I asked for. So I think we're doing good.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Yeah, thank you
Dan.
so much. So Dan, do you want to create a issue on our TAC repo, just to start a discussion as, what are ideas to incorporate within OpenSSF for DCI?
Yeah, let me think about because there's multiple open-ended questions in what I had there. So let me think about what makes sense to put into an individual issue.
Yeah, or multiple issues, however you want to, try it, whatever you think makes the most sense.
Sure.
Just a place for us to have a discussion, I think, is good. So, or even a document if people prefer that, and we can comment in there, whatever works. So,
all right, great.
Again, yeah, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. So the final topic that we have today is to continue on for our discussion with roadmap. So let me try to pull this up here. Oh, come on, Zoom.
Yeah, are you pulling up the wish list right now?
I'm trying, but Zoom.
Okay, how's this? Why don't you try fight the computer, and I'll talk and try to stall for you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I mean, we've already said that we would start working on this, but between then and now, the EO came out. I'm getting a lot of pressure that we really, that basically we OpenSSF need to hurry up, make decisions, declare what specific projects we're going to work on soon, or because the train is leaving the station. And if the OpenSSF does not declare a whole bunch more projects soon, no one will care. That's gone. So I think this needs, this is starting to become existential, where we need to move a number of projects that we haven't before. A number of working groups right now. I totally get it. They're working on kind of getting moving and started, but I think the OpenSSF membership decides what's going to do, but I'm getting a lot of indications that the decisions need to be made ASAP. So that's. Oh, have I stalled adequately for you? But although it's stalled, I stalled, I think this is important. If we want to get stuff done, we got to declare. And Dan made the very good point about, hey, what about funding and so on? And we need people. All agreed. I think there's actually opportunity for some funding if there was some declaration that, hey, this is really important. We need to start this now. But without an identification of what's important and a request, nothing happens.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
exactly.
and to add on to what David said, in our budget committee, we are what we need. So, a key outcome of this discussion is we want the projects we identify to go back to our budget committee, and then that becomes what we position to our community as, we want you to contribute funds to OpenSSF, and here's what your money will go towards.
You know what? I'm looking at the time. There's only 10 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, so we've run out of time to do any serious work on this. Ryan, you guys need to decide what you're going to do, but I would propose that you kick off another meeting much sooner. I mean, basically the decisions and so on, and raising up and proposing, that these final calls need to happen, at least, these initial set needs to happen pretty fast. If we wait for further TAC meetings and kick this can down the road, there will be no can.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually, because we started this, or restarted this, I should say, over a month ago now, and having these every 2 weeks, useful for some things, but I agree in this sense, it's a little bit more urgent. So I think what I'd like to do is get agreement right now about how best to proceed on this that folks are comfortable with. And then, yes, let's reschedule another meeting to explicitly go over it. What I was thinking, I mentioned earlier as a comment in this document I put, can we look at this wish list through the lens of the executive order and start pulling things out related to the EO and supply chain security in general, and really start putting those into a table of some sort? I don't know if we want to do that in this document, just to keep it all together, like put that table at the top that then links down to the specific details, and we kind of use that to facilitate the discussion. What are folks' preferences as far as how we want to actually?
May I suggest, don't. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Don't do it as a table. Go ahead.
I was going to volunteer a time that we could use for ongoing meetings. I do have a planning committee meeting that runs every Monday at 10 a.m. And so, and this is a kind of thing that I had thought we might discuss there. So I'd be happy to use that time for it. But, just an opportunity. Back to you, David.
I was just to say that, so every Monday, yeah, I would suggest not make a separate table, because I think this document's going to keep getting edited. So why don't just add as comments or write in the document itself, and that way, as you edit it, because if we have a separate table and this, they're going to go out of sync. We don't have time for that.
That's fair. I was hoping to have something just a little bit more structured so that we could facilitate the conversation, because there's a lot of content in this document. That was my only concern.
Well, I think the document's a working document. The correct result would be, here's the new document. Here's a list of 5 things we're going to do, or whatever the number is. And then you can link that to the EO and so on. But I think the purpose of this document is much more the helping people make decisions. And then when you make a decision, you can make a nice clean doc. But we need decisions soon. What I'm afraid of is we'll spend all the time making tables, and we don't need tables. We need decisions. Nobody cares about the tables. Well, I mean, people care, but I mean, what we need is decisions.
No, that's understandable. Yeah, in my mind, I think through decisions via tables, honestly. I'm just being perfectly frank, so maybe that's where my head went. I'm just like, it's a way that I structure my thought process.
If you're willing to do it, awesome. But I suggest that, given limited time, I mean, seriously, I think we're, how many days is it before we have decisions and announce it and go on? I mean, NIST is going to run off, and very, very soon they're going to decide what they're going to do, who's going to do it, and what things will be excluded.
Yeah, no, it's a really excellent point.
So they're going to unintentionally exclude a lot of things if we don't declare and make it clear to them.
So it sounds
David,
like,
could you be a little more specific, like what decisions you think we need to make? Is it funding or is it people or what is
It's
it? Like without
projects
hands on
that are
keyboards, we can't do things. So that
agreed.
seems the fundamental problem to me.
Well, okay. With money, you can get some hands on keyboards. Right now, we don't have a list of here are the things that we want to apply money to.
that's right.
Right. So
With
we want a
money,
list of funding requests then.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, well, here's a project that we intend to do if you
Yeah.
can get some funding for us, but we need funding here. I think there is, I mean, I can't speak for the governing board, and although I work for the Linux Foundation, I can't speak for their funding, but I think there is at least some interest. If you make a proposal, it will get very seriously considered. If there is no proposal, nothing happens, and other people who are going to be, will be proactive and do something else.
So Amir is here. Amir has submitted a proposal repeatedly over the last several months. Can I suggest we start with Amir?
Yeah, I thank you so much, Dan. I was hoping to just pop in for a couple minutes, and first off, thank you all for mentioning the program at the town hall, and the awareness is such a key factor. But I just thought I would check in with everyone and see what's going on in terms of if there are any updates on how that's going. I'd love to share just a couple of things that we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of advocating regarding funding this program and telling other organizations we've worked with in the past about it and trying to get them to join OpenSSF to get on board with this program, as well as reaching out directly to some folks. But I think going through, the TAC and governing board really makes the most sense. So I'm curious if there's any updates for me on that, if there's anything I can do or any questions I can answer to help make the audit program happen.
I think the big question after the last after your presentation, which I think we all liked, was everybody supported it. It was now a question of funding, right?
Okay.
And then I see Kay just had to drop, but I think Kay's the right person. She's working on the part of the excuse me, the budgeting committee from the governing board. So once that gets more solid, then I think we can have that next conversation about how to fund it and how much and what and that kind of thing. But I think that's universal, right? It's not just your program that's waiting on that. Like all they're waiting for that right now. But I think in my mind that's the next step, and that's exactly I think like what David's saying and to Dan's point as well. I think if we go through this document and we identify all these initiatives, and yours is definitely one of those as well, right? And then we put those funding requests in there and we kind of do it, holistically all together. I think that's sort of our next steps, and yours is absolutely included in that in my mind.
Let's see.
Yeah, I was at the last budgeting committee, and they pulled out a, hey, we got to start with the budget. So they pulled out a very generic budget of, hey, marketing this and that, but they don't have the list yet of what projects are going to get funded. And I don't just mean security audits. I mean in general.
Yeah.
And that's what, that's not quite true. They do have some, but there aren't many. The SKF and badging has made some small requests. Some others have made some small requests, but we don't have here are the new projects we want to start up.
Mm-hmm.
And that
right.
needs to hurry up because very, very soon people are going to create projects and they will compete and take the air out of whatever you might have done.
This is Mike with Linux Foundation. If you're thinking about things like, putting fingers on keyboards to address issues in a top 100 list of open source projects, and we need to hire 50 contractors to go do that type of work, or we need 12 contractors to go help open source projects that everybody's dependent upon and reusing, create their own SBOM so that all the vendors and downstream participants can take that SBOM and put it into what they need to deliver in their solutions. Things like that. If there's budget requirements attached to that, we'll go out and try to figure out how to fundraise and get the money for that. But right now, what we need to know is what are the most important things that would help move the needle in terms of improving the state of the situation.
So Mir put together a very detailed proposal on like 50 projects or something like this, and we're just kind of stuck at this point. So we can keep putting more of those together, but I don't think that's gonna help get things unstuck. I think Amir's asked for more money than we have completely. So just without knowing what the next steps are for the proposals we already have, hesitant to start throwing more proposals onto the fire.
Well, I would disagree. I believe we do know the next steps, right? The budgeting committee is working on that, and once they have the budget, like that, those are the next steps, right? And then they can put a formal request in that, and then some amount will get allocated, just like all the other projects.
All
I
right,
see.
so we're running out of time. Kay
Yeah.
had asked if we wanted to use the Monday planning committee time to move forward more quickly. I can't vote, but I guess I can propose. I make a motion. Why don't we continue that discussion, that planning committee? Dan, your point about your point's well taken, but I think right now what's needed is here's that prioritized list. Okay, there's no funding. Great. What do you want? Bring that to people who can at least say yes or no. Right now, no one who has money has anything to fund against. There is no list as far as they're concerned. You have a list. Amir has a list. No one who controls money has seen the list, as far as I know.
Well, how do we get Amir's list to the people with the money then?
I think that's a discussion from. I think basically it gets to the budget committee and then up through the governing board, maybe.
Correct.
But
yeah.
and then but we're kind of stuck in I think there's interest, but we need to move forward. Let's see here.
I'll start by sharing the public list.
Okay.
That's anyone can access that document.
Okay.
So feel free to share that with anyone who needs to be shared with, and I'm more than happy to do any kind of speaking or presenting in any way to talk more to, if someone needs help with like, well, where is this money going? What is it going to do? I'd be happy to help to go through that with folks, and so that their member organizations feel comfortable with participating in the program.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can I propose that we continue this discussion on the Monday planning meeting with, since it looks like Kay's open to that?
Yes, yeah, I was going to suggest that as well. So if people want to participate in that, please email myself or David or Kay, and we'll make sure that you get the invite to that. And then if we feel like there's even more urgency, David, we can try to schedule something even later this week if folks are available. I know times are hard, but in the meantime, yeah, let's plan on Monday, and we'll continue this conversation there. Continue to do the read-throughs on these. If you haven't, read the executive order, right? Because that'll be the context in which we're having this discussion. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time, and we'll pick back up on Monday.
Thanks everyone. Thank you for letting me participate.
Oh, thank you. Bye everyone.
Bye.